It's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce Scott Porad. A mutual friend introduced us a number of years ago as I was transitioning my music magazine online and had several semi-disastrous experiences trying to get a website developed for that. And Scott was incredibly patient and knowledgeable and helpful and had tons of experience and knowledge that he shared with me. And I know he'll have a lot of great information for you all today. Scott?
So how the CTO looks at your project. This is an internet meme, exceptionally disgusted baby or something like that. I don't really know. And so I've been building websites for a long time. Actually, I think my next slide is all about me. Let me tell you a little bit about me. So I'll start up there in the left, upper left. That's the University of Washington, looking down Rainier Vista at Mount Rainier. I went to the University of Washington. I was a campus tour guide during the summers. So I know all sorts of facts about that. After college, I got a degree in business and marketing, but I wound up getting a job building websites. I built a website for that guy, Seth Godin, who some of you may have heard of. I didn't work for him for very long, but he was very influential on me because he was really at the beginning of his permission marketing movement, I guess is what you call it. After working for Seth for a little while, I lived in New York. I worked for a few other companies. I came back to Seattle. I worked for a company called Starwave. Starwave was a Paul Allen company. And we basically built all the websites for Disney. So I primarily worked on ESPN.com, but I also worked on ABC News. We built a lot of the websites for professional sports leagues, NBA.com, NFL.com, and NHL.com. We didn't have the baseball. Worked on a website called Wall of Sound, which is all about music, a whole bunch of different things. So that was in 1995, 1996, 1997, that era. 1998 is when I left Starwave. And we were sort of just creating the internet back then. It was a pretty neat time to work for a Paul Allen company because it was like there was a big bucket of cash over in the corner. And he just said, go figure out interesting things that you can make. And then in 1998, the internet bubble was starting to get really hot. The .com was starting to be the buzz. And I left there and I went to go work for a company called drugstore.com. And I started there. We were about 40 employees. We grew to 700 employees in 15 months. And we went through the whole .com roller coaster of going up and then busting down. And that was a real education and a whole bunch of things about how to do things well and how to not do things very well. And then coming down here to the lower right, I worked for about 5 years for this company called ICANN Has Cheeseburger. Actually, the company was called Cheeseburger, but our first claim to fame was a website called ICANN Has Cheeseburger, which is all about internet memes and internet humor. We had about 50, 60 sites that we ran, plus a 30, 40,000 user-operated sites, and all sorts of stuff we did. We went from, when I started there, we were doing maybe 100,000 page views a day to 2.4 million unique visitors a day at our peak. So a lot of growth there and a lot going on. And then a little bit about me. There's my family again. You can see where I got that picture from. And then that's my dog. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I skipped a really key piece, by the way. That's my dog. I work at a company called Rover. Rover.com is where I'm working now, and that's my dog, Oscar, over there. Rover.com helps people find dog sitters. Who has a dog? So I can help you. So if you need to go out of town, you need to travel, you need to find a dog walker, all that kind of thing, you can go to Rover.com and find someone to do that for you. It's a collaborative consumption marketplace. It's just like Airbnb, right? People who want to watch your dog in your neighborhood have gone on there and said, I'll do it, and you can go find a real person to leave your dog with. I was started about 2.5 years ago by a friend of mine who ended up having to leave his dog at a kennel, and it was really terrible, and he thought to himself, there must be a neighbor of mine who's willing to watch my dog. I just don't know who they are. And so this is a way to find them. And so I grew up here in the Northwest. I love to ski. I'm at Crystal there. That's Mount Rainier in the background. I'm a big live music fan. And then I've been to every Sasquatch music festival except for one. That little boy on the left, he was born the Tuesday before one of them, so that's like a legit excuse, right? And then I have this weird thing. I love books. I like buying books more than I like reading books. But I found out that if I take pictures of books, it kind of feels like you're buying them, and then you don't have a whole house filled with books that you haven't read. So I have this weird thing that I take pictures of books in addition to reading them. I really love books. So that's all about me. And I guess the thing that you'd notice about all these websites that I've worked on, there's actually something very common in between all of them that may or may not be appropriate for exactly what you're doing, but they're all consumer-facing. They're all pretty high volume. I've worked on smaller websites too, but I've worked on a bunch of big high-volume websites. They're not, we weren't building shrink-wrapped software, so it wasn't Microsoft Word, or it wasn't anything like that. I've never had that experience of actually building something and pressing it to a CD and sending it out to the world. I've never done client work, so I've never worked at an agency. I have done some client work in the past, but I've never actually had that as a big portion of my career where I've had to be, where my customer is a client who's actually paying me. So that has a big influence on how you think about technology and what projects look like. And I've never really done anything that's throwaway. I know a lot of client work especially is the kind of thing where you're building something for a campaign. It gets built, maybe it lasts for 6 weeks before the Super Bowl or something like that. And it might live on a server forever, but the intent is not to have it forever. I've always worked on web applications that are websites, that are products that are meant to last in perpetuity. And all those things influence how you look at a project when it comes your way. And it will influence a little bit about this talk, because that's the perspective that I'm looking at it from. So I want to make sure that you all understand that perspective. Oops, what's going on here? Okay, so golf. I'm really lucky. I grew up on a street that one block in one direction was a golf course, and then another block in the other direction was a lake. And so I was pretty fortunate. My parents belonged to the golf course that was a block away, and my brother and I could golf there free. Starting at age 6, we started golfing, and then when you were 8, you could take a test, and then you could go golf by yourself. That was a big deal. So anyway, I'm a terrible golfer, and despite probably, I've golfed so much in my life, and you'd think I'd be better at it, but it's harder than you think. And I had a really interesting experience. I guess, has anybody golf here? Anybody go out to Sahali a few years ago when the U.S. Senior Open was here? 1 or 2 people did. You did, great. So basically, if you watch golf on TV, it's sort of like an entertainment experience. You get to see everything that's going on. And if you watch golf on TV, by the way, you're probably have better things to do. But that being said, if you're watching golf on TV, they've created an entertainment experience. When you go to watch a golf tournament in person, there's a few ways you can do it. One way is you can pick a group of golfers and you can follow them along through, and walk with them the whole course. And that's nice, and you don't really get any context for what's going on in the whole tournament, but you get to see how these guys are doing and you sort of get to play along with them. And I've done that before. And then the other way you can watch a golf tournament is you can go find a spot and you can sit there for the whole day and you can watch all the golfers come by. And that's fun because you get to see all your favorite golfers if you have favorite golfers for just a few minutes. And so when I went out to the U.S. Senior Open a few years, I spent one day, I walked with Fred Couples, who's from Seattle, Fred Couples and Bernhard Longer and Mark Calcavecchia. I walked with them one day. And the next day, I sat at a hole all day long. I don't remember the hole. I remember what it looked like, but I don't know what number it was. And what was really interesting is these golfers would tee off, and then they'd hit the ball into the middle of the fairway, and then they'd hit the ball to the green. And you sit there for 3-4 hours, and you just watch this same thing happen over and over again. And you can start, immediately, like, who's going to make a mistake and who's doing well, right? You see a guy's tee shot go over there, and you know, like, oh, there's no way he's going to be able to get it on the green from there, right? And these are professional golfers. And you start to think, like, gosh, as a professional golfer, if they were sitting here all day, think of the advantage they would have, right? I'd see guys who'd hit it in spots on the green, and I just knew there was no way they could get a putt in from where they were hitting it. But they didn't know because they'd only played this course a few times. Maybe they came earlier in the week, they practiced a few times, and now this was their second or third round. So you get this huge advantage in whatever you're doing, whether it's golf, whether it's building websites, whether it's jogging, whatever you're doing, of repetition, of seeing the same thing go over and over again. This summer, I started to get a fascination with river rafting. I went whitewater rafting for a few times. I'd never really done that before. And it was a lot of fun. And I had the same experience. There was, after this rafting trip we were on, we were sitting on the riverbank, and there was this part where you had to come down at the very end. It was like a water slide almost. You had to sort of ride the boat down. And you could just tell by how the boats came over the top of this, I mean, I guess you call it a waterfall technically, but it was more like a small little cliff, who was going to make it down successfully and who was going to sort of bite it. And I thought to myself, that's sort of like what happens when you're some sort of engineering leader. You just watch these projects float by, just like on the golf course, over and over again. And you start to see what I like to call as smells. Oh no, where's my smells slide? Okay, there's my smells slide. I guess I had them out of order. You start to have, there's smells, right? Like you smell the milk. And because of something, you don't taste the milk, but you know the milk is bad. Now, I'm not saying your project is bad, but what I'm trying to say is you start to get a whiff of stuff, which you're like, I don't know if this one's going to go that well. Because you just get a sixth sense, just like you see the golfers on the golf course or the guys who are river rafting down the chute. You start to get a sixth sense for like, oh, I've seen this pattern before, and this one doesn't turn out very well. And so a lot of what I'm going to tell you today is a little bit jaded. I'm doing this intentionally. I'm sort of coming from a jaded, negative point of view with the intention of, the outcome being maybe I can get people to rethink a little bit about how you do things at your workplace or the projects that you're working on and inspire maybe a little bit of a different result. And by the way, one of the reasons you see so many of these projects flow by the river so fast and you see the smells is who's heard that phrase, fail fast? Right? We've developed We've developed this culture of failing fast. And that's a good thing, right? But the result is that you get to see a lot of mistakes. If you're sitting by the riverbank and seeing a lot of projects flow by, you get to see a lot of mistakes. So I'll be a little bit negative like Grumpy Cat here. All right, moving right along, we've seen smells, because I was out of order there. And my notes are now still out of order. Okay, got 4 key points here. So as a CTO, first of all, your project is not my top priority. I got other priorities, and I'm going to tell you about what those are in a minute. The second is, your project is probably harmful. It's probably going to make my product worse than how it is now. So I'm already skeptical to begin before we even get out of the gate. It's not really a very good way to start it'd be terrible to go out on a date and already believe that this person is crazy, right? So got some data to show that. Your project is likely to be on schedule is not true. Oh, it's unlikely to be on schedule. Yeah, your project's very unlikely to be on schedule. And we probably all experienced that frustration of not being on time or under budget. I was talking to a contractor recently about how he bid things. He said, I make my very best effort at figuring out an accurate schedule. I double it, and I hope I'm within 10%. So we're going to talk about why that is. And then the ROI on your project is dubious. I got a little bit of data, and I'll point you guys in the right direction if you want to really get into this further, about how predicting accurate ROIs on technology projects is pretty much close to impossible. Okay, so my top priority. What is my top priority? So a few little stories here. I worked at drugstore.com. I mentioned that. I worked there for 8 years. One of my jobs there towards the end is I ran IT operations. We had 5 or 6 facilities in 2 or 3 different time zones. We had 2 data centers. We had 2 call centers and 2 distribution centers. So I guess that's 6 plus our corporate office. So we had a lot of IT going on there, a lot of printers, a lot of network, a lot of computers, all this kind of stuff. And one day, we had this team, the network operations team. They had a room that we called the NOC, the Network Operations Center. It's like you'd imagine in the movies, had all these screens on the wall. It was very sexy and glamorous about all the things that were going on in our network, and lots of blips and noises. So, but mostly what happened in that room was a whole lot of nothing. Guys just basically waiting for computers to fail. So I'm in there one day just hanging out, and I noticed a light go red, and I noticed the engineer, his name was John. He had been the first Iraq war veteran. I remember that about him. And I noticed him do his thing, and I was like, oh, what just happened there? He's like, oh, that machine just crashed. I just rebooted that machine. So drugstore.com, the infrastructure, we had 40 front-end web servers to serve the website. Now, this is sort of an era before AWS and before the cloud when you had to have all your own stuff. So before I'd worked on IT operations, I'd actually spent 4 years working in product management at drugstore.com. And I knew that the capacity of a single web server could hold about 2,500 shopping carts at any given time. And so when we sort of filled those up, we had to get more shopping carts and more servers. And I knew that when a server crashed, I knew also from my experience having, prior to that, worked on the development team and actually built part of the shopping cart, that the shopping cart was stored in memory. So when John rebooted this machine because it crashed, 2,500 customers lost their shopping cart. Meaning that it's like they'd gotten in line at the Gap, and somebody just magically came up and like put the stuff back on the shelves for them while they were waiting to check out, which is a pretty bad customer experience, right? And so I said to John, I was like, well, that seems pretty bad. Do you tell anybody about that? He's like, yeah, we got this log, we tell people about it, but nothing ever seems to get done. And so that was really influential on me, that moment in my career. And I'm going to come back and explain to you why in a second. The second thing that happens on any big popular website, even small ones, is we have these things called exceptions. So is anybody an engineer in the room? Got a few engineers, marketing folks. Who are marketing folks in the room? Marketing folks, what do we got? Business people? I don't know. We got editors, got any journalists, business people? Okay, got all sorts of folks. So for those of you who are not engineers, who have never been engineers, this is kind of what an exception looks like. You write some code, and our software systems have a way to try something out. So I'm going to try to activate the flux capacitor here by driving my DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour. And if it doesn't work, I catch the error. If it throws an error, that's called an exception, and I write it to some sort of log. Now that log system might aggregate those and send out reports and emails and alerts, et cetera. Even on the best websites, the best coded websites, hundreds and hundreds of these happen a day. Because you know what? The internet's a big, wide open place. People's browsers don't work right. They got Windows XP with 7 toolbars in their IE. They got all sorts of stuff going on, right? And it just happens. And if you try and figure out every single one of them, you'll go crazy. But you do pay a lot of attention looking for patterns, looking for things that are new. So every time we release code, we look to see if we're getting new types of exceptions. And this is a lot of stress, actually, because we're always worrying. These are like little signals of maybe something going wrong, and we're always worrying about if there's something lurking there. And one of the big things you can start to see in this is where we start to get into the security world, which is one of the things we worry a lot about is, are we going to get hacked? And the bigger your website, or maybe the more controversial or the more visibility that you have, the more likely it is there's someone who's going to try and hack into you in any different ways. Just at Cheeseburger alone, I can think of 2 or 3 instances so a DDoS, or a distributed denial of service attack, that's basically where somebody, for whatever reason they want, sends so much traffic to your website that it's overwhelmed and it gets shut down. Sometimes the way they do this is that they find a way that they can cause an exception, and they fill up your logs with so many exceptions that it brings you to a grinding halt. There's ways you can engineer around this, but it's the kind of things we worry about. Sometimes they just try and hack in. We found one day that we found someone making thousands and thousands of fake user accounts in a programmatic way, and we had no idea why they were doing it. We didn't know what they were doing. It could have been some bot or crawler that did it inadvertently. It could have been somebody who was nefarious. And so these are the kind of things that totally fly under the radar. They're never on the all-company meeting that we're worrying about. They're never on the roadmap. It's the kind of thing that the engineering team is just stressed out about and worrying about all on their own. And so what that boils down to is, to get to the first point, which is my top priority, as the person running your engineering organization, my number one priority is LODO. Keep the lights on and the doors open. It's like this unspoken thing. When we're prioritizing all of our projects for Q4, nobody prioritizes at the top, spend the time and energy to make sure the store is open, right? Because if people can't get to your store, get to your news website, get to your publication, whatever you have, you're out of business, right? But this is pry number 1. It's pry number 0. And it's the big unspoken thing that happens. And the way we manage this is kind of with attacks, effectively. I mean, some companies love operations teams that try and focus on this, which is kind of hard. But at the end of the day, what CTOs and CIOs and engineering managers do is we put a hidden little tax on all your projects, which is subversively skimming off a little bit of the resources to deal with these things. Sometimes we skim them off in a very upfront way. So for instance, at Rover, where I work now, we have 2 people who we rotated amongst our engineers who focus on the operations, always trying to look at exceptions, fix problems, fix performance issues, things like that. Let me grab my bottle of water. but we're always, borrowing a little bit in order to find time to deal with these things, because they're not the kind of things that make it to the top of a priority list. And they're also not the kind of thing that you can really plan for a lot of the time. A lot of the time you have to deal with it as it happens because you weren't expecting it. And that's not really, I guess I have another slide here. That's not really a great way to manage your business, is to have people who are subversively using resources to do the right thing. It's good that engineers do it, but it's probably not the best way. It's the best way to get that stuff on the surface. So, for instance, when I spent my time at Cheeseburger and we would make goals for every 6-month period, goal number 1 was always maintain the existing business and apply resources to maintaining the existing business. Number 2 was almost always support the reporting needs of the business, because we're almost always having to provide data to the business in order to keep it going. And then goal number 3, 4, 5, 6, and on were things like redesign the site or add a new widget to my Flipper Gidget or whatever we needed to do to make the site better. So keep those things on the surface. So the point I'm trying to get at ultimately is when you come down the hallway to your engineering team and say, hey, we really have to do this thing right now. It's really, really important for Q4. Well, in Q4, if you're running an e-commerce store or if you're running a news site or if you're doing whatever you're doing, what's really important is keeping it up, because that's when you get the traffic, is in the winter. And these guys are stressed out, and that's what they're worried about. And most of us, we were the kids that were picked last on the playground, right? So it always feels bad, right? Everyone's harping on you. You just feel bad, and you want to feel good about what you're doing. So that's one of the ways we think about it. Okay, so I can't see my next slide, so I hope it's what I think it is. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, so we'll move on to making it worse. So first thing is, our top priority is actually keeping things up and running. It's not building new stuff. The next thing is, I forgot to mention something if I go back to worry and stress here for a second. We have a culture in our country which is new and more is better, when sometimes just better is better. If I go back to my example at drugstore.com, I hate to pick on those guys so much, but it might have been better for that marketing team or for the business team to invest the technical engineering resources on making it so servers stayed up and shopping carts didn't get dumped. That might have been better for business than building some new thing where there was some risk of adoption. We already knew those people wanted to shop with us. They put stuff in a shopping cart. Right? They were walking around our store collecting up things. That's pretty high, shows a pretty high intent to buy. And so one of the really challenging things we face, both as people who are designing websites, whether you're planning or a visual designer or whatever, and people who are building websites, is overcoming this very ingrained in our American culture idea that new and more is better. Sometimes we can get a lot more and a lot more better, reliable results by just improving what we have. And there's actually a very interesting little axiom, or I don't know if axiom is the right word, but does anybody have a freemium product where you give it away for free and then people can maybe pay for some upgraded levels? No freemium products. Okay, well, if you did have a freemium product, this is the customer feedback you'd find out. Everybody who signs up for the free level wants more features. And everybody who signs up for the pay level, so that's what their customer service feedback says. The people who signed up for the pay levels, they want the app to work better the way it is. They just want it to work better. Because they value enough of what's there that they're willing to pay for it, and they just want it to work better for them. Whereas people who are paying on the free level, they don't value it enough to pay. So they want some other stuff that you don't have already. So it just fits with the fact that we're swimming uphill in our world, in America, maybe in other countries too, I don't know, I've never lived or worked anywhere else, but we're swimming uphill in that regard. All right, making it worse, hammer and nail. So you heard the expression, of course, everything to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're doing something online, the engineers are your hammer. The first place everybody goes is to build something new on the website. The truth is, a lot of what drives our businesses isn't what happens on the website. A lot of our businesses are driven by word of mouth. Word of mouth just takes time. It takes things that don't necessarily happen on the website. You can make the product really good so that people will tell their friends and family about it, but sometimes making the product an incremental amount better doesn't cause people to tell their friends any more about it. That isn't always the case. So let me give you an example of the opposite of the hammer and the nail. Early on at Cheeseburger, we had launched about 9 sites. Each site was taking us about 6 weeks to launch, maybe 8 weeks, and they were going really well. We were having a lot of success, and it was pretty fun. And we had a list, we had an idea bank of like 400 other sites we wanted to try out. And we just couldn't get them going fast enough. So we started to design this big system. It was going to be a customized content management system. So we could spin up these sites. We were going to spend all this engineering money, all of our VC money. We were going to spend on this and do all this stuff. And one day we're sitting around talking about how much work this is going to be and how hard it's going to be. And I said, what we could do is we could just go to like a web host and pay $30 a month and start a WordPress blog site. And as opposed to having this complicated submission system, I guess you have to know a little bit about Cheeseburger. We used all user-generated content, so people submitted their content. We had a form where people could upload it. And to make it scale for a bunch of all these sites was going to be complicated. I said what we could do is we could use WordPress, and we could just for free open a Gmail account and tell people to email us their pictures. And it would be pretty labor-intensive to have to actually go into the email and download the pictures and things like that. But it actually cost a lot less than having to build all this technology, and we would find out actually if each of these new ideas worked. And if a new idea did work, then we could actually convert it over into a site and start to build out our platform. And we did that, and in the next 6 months we launched 24 sites, and our traffic, I wish I should have a traffic chart here, it just went through the roof. And so the point is a lot of times we get really caught up in the hammer we have, the resources we have in front of us. If you're a PR team, the resources you have is sometimes sending out a press release or working and calling the media. If you're a product team, your resource is an engineering team or a design team, and that's the hammer you've got. And it's hard for us lots of times to get out of our identity and think about, well, what am I trying to do here? And maybe there's a different hammer or a different tool I could use to get there. And that's one of the things I think that ends up harming us a lot is that we don't use the right tool for the job. Personally is a strong word. I had a friend who was very handy, and together we remodeled the kitchen in our house, which basically meant I was his assistant. But what I learned in that process is that he had a tool for everything. The tools were crazy. He came over the first day, he brought truckloads of tools, and he had a specific little tool for every task. And so having the right tool for the job is really important. If you use the wrong tool for the job, sometimes you make your website worse. Okay, so another thing. Oh, deck chairs. Okay, so I guess to drive home that last point, is we've heard this expression, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, which is a phrase that people use when you're trying to do something which in the big picture doesn't make any difference. And so kind of combining the first and second points, when projects come down that river, lots of times as your engineering team, you start to say, this is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. What matters is that we're dumping shopping carts on the floor, right? What doesn't matter is this little thing that we're doing over here in the corner. And so keeping some perspective is important as well. I lost a slide. Okay, well, it's gone. Okay, so this guy, Ronnie Kohavi. Ronnie Kohavi is one of my heroes. Ronnie, are you here? I met him once. I'd love to meet him again. Ronnie started the split test, they call them web test team at Amazon in the late 90s. So Amazon was very well renowned for everything they put on, they call them web labs, actually, is what they called them. Everything they put out on the web, they sent it to different groups, and they're really rigorous. Anybody from Amazon work here? Or anyone work at Amazon here? No? Nobody? So they were pioneers in this, and Ronnie was the pioneer of that. He found that about 50% of the things that they put up at Amazon made the site better. The remaining 50% either were neutral or made it worse. After a number of years, Ronnie left and he went over to Microsoft, and he was doing the same thing. They built a group for doing experimentation. At Microsoft, they were seeing about a 30% success rate. They were seeing about a third of the things be successful, a third of the things didn't make any difference, a third of the things actually made things worse. And then I found this data in a book about testing a company called QualPro, which is a consulting agency. They've been around about 30 years, but in the book, they tested about 150,000 ideas over 22 years, and they saw about a 75% failure rate, or 25% success rate, and the remainder being either made it worse or made it neutral. So people at Amazon, people at Microsoft, this company Qual Pro, these are smart people. These are people with college degrees and graduate degrees, people who have expertise and experience in their field, who have done all the things we're supposed to do to have a project come out good. And more often than not, it's either neutral or makes it worse. And so we line up these projects, we line up these boats to send them down the river, these trains to send them down the track, and we always assume that it's going to be positive, that it's going to make the business better. When we combine this with a culture of fail fast, the reality is, most of the time, probably closer to that 25% of the time, this isn't going to be successful. It's going to actually make things worse. The result of that is you have to kind of really keep your team, both your engineering team and your business team, to sort of have a very elevated mindset. One of the things I talk about a lot to my teams is, what's our measure of success? Is it conversion? Is it more revenue? Is it more traffic, et cetera, et cetera? No. Our measure of success is none of those things. Our measure of success is, did we learn something? Because if you're going to fail at a rate of 50, 33, or succeed at only those rates, you better be learning from every one of those things so that the next iteration you can do a little bit better. So you got to really work hard to keep that team, to keep their spirits up by saying, look, our goal here is to try and learn something and understand something so that we can do the next one better. Because if we believe that this is going to, if we're banking in the fourth quarter on this feature that we're going to deliver, chances are really pretty low. It also brings me to a thought about the investor Warren Buffett. He has this phrase about being long-term greedy. It's one of my favorite expressions. Long-term greedy versus short-term greedy. So what he means is, like he's sacrificing or maybe not placing bets today in his investments because in the long run he wants to make more money. And in our culture, where new and more is better, and where we're driven by quarters, and we always want to go faster, Brad Feld, one of the investors in Rover, also one of the investors in Cheeseburger, wrote a book called Do More Faster, which probably caused more harm to me and my engineering teams than like anything ever. Doing more faster isn't always being long-term greedy. And if we're going to win in the long run, sometimes you have to set that horizon out a little bit further. Okay, let's move on to the next thing, which is your schedule. It is very unlikely that your schedule is going to happen as you hope. Who has ever been late somewhere because of traffic? I have, frequently, especially in Seattle. So traffic is a flow system. So is getting work done as a flow system. And there's different kinds of traffic we've all experienced. There is traffic when there's an accident or a car's broken down and it's actually blocking the flow. And once you get through it, everything flows great. So like we have a traffic accident happening at Rover right now, which is we started a project to do an infrastructure thing and it's taken like 6 weeks longer than we hoped. And so it's just blocking the flow of projects and it feels really crummy. So we've all been in that kind of traffic. Now, there's other kind of traffic. You've been in the traffic, I'm sure, at rush hour where there's just too many cars on the road, right? That's frustrating. It's like, multiple people trying to go through the same door. You've seen the clowns trying to go through the door at the same time, and everyone's trying to squeeze through, and they can't do it. So there's that kind of traffic. We've all experienced that. There's another kind of traffic that's exceptionally frustrating. I've experienced this, and I bet you have too. It's when the road looks kind of clear, but for some reason, like everybody's getting in everybody's way, and you're just like, if everyone could sort of realign here, we could all go faster. You ever experienced that kind of traffic? It's really frustrating because you see spaces on the road, but you're like, oh, this is driving me crazy. So there's that kind of traffic. And what's really interesting is the tipping point between freely flowing and that sort of middle, like we're almost going, and traffic jam happens really quickly and almost unnoticed. And what this is called, this is sort of a maximum utilization versus maximum flow problem. What we're trying to do is when we put all those cars on the road, we're trying to get maximum utilization out of that resource. Put as many cars on the road as possible because we invested in all these roads, so we want to shove them out there. But maximum utilization actually varies inversely a lot to maximum flow. Cars flow the most when when you're the only car on the highway. That's when you're going the fastest, right? And then we see the same problem when as a community, we add more lanes to our highway. We introduce more resources to make traffic go faster. but we don't actually maintain the same flow through. It allows more cars to get on the road. Same thing happens with engineering teams, exactly the same thing. We try and maximize the utilization of these resources because they're high-priced resources. They're hard to come by. Good developers are very hard to come by. And when we try and fill up that schedule 100%, just like we try and fill up the highways 100%, we actually don't get maximum flow. You can actually get more flow by doing a little bit less and by providing some slack in your schedules. Because inevitably, as I'm going to talk about when I talk about building codes in a second, there's a lot of things that go wrong that we don't understand and we don't account for. And by intentionally doing that, we can actually get things done a lot faster. It's one of the experiments I'm doing with scheduling at Rover right now is we're planning a lot of slack in our time, and we're finding our flow goes a lot better. Big piece of that is expectations. I think I'm going to talk about that on my next slide. Nope, I'm going to talk about fence post. Okay, so this is just another example of, actually this is an example of something kind of related to flow, but quick story. So let's say it takes you 1 hour to dig a hole and put in a fence post and put the dirt back in. 60 minutes. Now, little question. If I got 10 people together and said, I picked 10 of us here, and I said, hey, we are going to work together to dig this fence post hole. Would it take more or less than 1 hour? Who thinks it would take more than 1 hour? A few people. Who thinks it would take less than 1 hour? A few other people, but a lot of people didn't vote. Okay, so now we're going to do this again, and everyone has to vote. Okay, so if you think it's going to take more than an hour, everyone look around. What do you think? That's 40% of the room? Who do you think it's going to take more than an hour? Oh, less than an hour. I said more? It's actually few. It seems like less people think more. It's going to take more. You know why? You're going to have a committee. You're going to decide who's going to dig. You're all going to stand around and give the guy instructions. You're digging wrong. Use the shovel like this. Everything takes more. This is a notion called the mythical man month. I think that's my next slide, the mythical man month. And a guy named Fred Brooks in 1975 wrote a book called The Mythical Man Month, and he talked about why when you add more people to a project, it takes longer. He used the expression, 9 pregnant women don't make a baby in a month, right? It takes 9 months. The reason it takes longer is there's 3 reasons. The first is some tasks can't be easily subdivided. Digging a fence post, you can pretty much do it with 1 shovel and 1 person at a time. Maybe you can fit 2 shovels in there, but probably pretty unlikely. The second reason is there's ramp-up time. We all know this. You come onto a new project, you got to understand what's going on. It's not just ramp up on the work, it's ramp up on the culture of the team. How these other people work, where do I fit in, what should I do? That's the next thing. The third reason is there's communication overhead. This is probably the biggest problem, is that every person you add to a project, or every team amongst teams that you add to a project, now they all have to talk to each other and they have to coordinate. They have to work to figure out ways to work together. And coordination is really, really hard because you know what? Human words and emails and things like this are really inexact, right? They're not science. They're English, frankly. And English is an inexact language. It's not German where they have got these great, long, beautiful words which tell you exactly things. So the long story short is we put these things together, we maximize our resources, we put a bunch of people on things because we think we can make it go faster, and then when it goes slow, we think we can add more people. All this stuff just slows it down. In addition, we're not very good at building software. So, another pop quiz. Who thinks they know when the first structures, first homes, shelters were built on Earth? Who thinks it was more than 1,000 years ago? Of course it was more than 1,000 years ago. That was the Middle Ages. We'll keep on going back. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, that was the beginning of the Common Era. Well, we know it was then. People lived in Jerusalem, right? I mean, there was that whole thing going on. We go back further. We go back 3, 4, 5,000 years. Well, we know it was then, right? Because that's like in the Bible, that's Abraham, and like he had tents in the desert, so they were building shelters, right? We go back further and further. They found, going back between 9 and 11,000 years, that's Stonehenge time, right? So they've actually found other ruins of building shelters 10,000 years ago. Well, then you go back to this picture. This is a sketch of somewhere in Japan where they think they found a shelter from almost 500,000 years ago. Predecessors to us, some sort of ape-like creatures, had figured out how to build stuff. So somewhere between 500,000 and 10,000 years, in that range, let's just cut it off at 10, we've been building homes. So people like to use the analogy of building software, building websites is a lot about building homes, or a lot like building a house, right? You make a blueprint, you have a schedule, you do all these things, et cetera, et cetera. We've been building websites for 20, 21 years. Nothing, not even a blink in 10,000 years. When it comes to building homes, we have building codes, we have fire codes. We've got it down to a science. There's engineers who figured out how strong the walls have to be and how far apart the joists have to be so that we don't all fall through this floor, right? There's a lot of years and generations and generations and generations and centuries of knowledge that has been built and built and built and built and built in order to understand how to build homes. When it comes to websites and software, we're building this stuff. We're building Stonehenge. Every time we do it, we're learning for the first time. And in the last 5 or 10 years, a lot of things have been worked out to make it go faster. What we built at drugstore.com that took us a year or two and $25 million and 100 engineers, you can now go get from Magento. So there's been some improvement there. You know, what we built, say, at ESPN, you can now do with Rails, right? A lot of this stuff is being consolidated. But it's like saying it's the tip of the iceberg is an insult to icebergs everywhere. I mean, it's like we're like the snowflake on the top of the iceberg, right? We're nothing. Nothing's been done. And so when we go to build these projects, and we think even engineers, when we give them great specs, when we give them time, when we give them all these resources, when we think that they can accurately estimate how something is how something is going to succeed or go according to plan, we're just deluding ourselves. We can try. I think at best we can get within 60%. I've actually tracked this a lot in my career. I've tracked a metric called schedule accuracy or schedule attainment. And let's see here, it's not what I wanted to do. Schedule attainment. And really the best teams, they're like hitting the schedule 60%. So they plan to do 100 things in a period of time, they get 60 of them done. The best engineers and the best teams do it that way. I mean, look, how could I give this talk without talking about healthcare.gov, right? I mean, for me, I've been doing this almost 20 years now. When I started to read, they had all these contractors and they were going to do a big launch, right? And there was going to be a ton of traffic on the first day. And everyone cared about this and it was under a microscope. I could have told you from a mile away this thing was going to be a disaster, right? I mean, a government contractor writing a spec and handing it off to an agency, and it was probably all outsourced. It was probably subcontracted like 7 times, right? I mean, think of the game of telephone when it finally gets to the guy, the engineer at the bottom, the frontline engineer at the bottom of the telephone game, being like, what am I supposed to build? All right, I'll just type this thing up, right? So, I mean, our chances of hitting a schedule for another 4,000 years are pretty low. I don't mean to bring your expectations down to 0, but I'm trying to provide some context here. So that's why your schedule is not going to be on time. Now, what's going on here? Where's the mouse? There it is. Oh, another reason why your schedule is not going to be on time. I assume many of you have heard of the iron triangle. Good, fast, cheap, pick 2. Right? If you have really great respect for the iron triangle, I actually had a CEO once say to me, Scott, I literally want you to pull time out of thin air. He said that to me in front of the whole leadership team, and I was like, are you kidding me? Because cheap is basically fixed. We just talked about how you can't add more resources to a project right away because they have to ramp up in the mythical man month, the 9 pregnant women, and all that stuff. So you're really picking between good, fast, cheap, right? This is a case study house. I don't know if it was cheap or fast, but I do know that it's good. The case study houses were these projects that were done in the 50s and 60s in Los Angeles to highlight really great modern design. When you don't really respect the iron triangle, you get this thing, the Winchester Mystery House. Who's familiar with the Winchester Mystery House? A lot of people are. Okay, so great. Winchester Mystery House was built by the heir to the Winchester rifle fortune and started building this house with no plan. Just started adding stuff on, right? A room here and doors that went to nowhere there, and it's a whole crazy mess. It's down in California. It's a tourist attraction now. And the point is for our websites and our software projects, we're doing this all the time. We're not thinking holistically about the thing. We're in a rush to build more faster. We're getting behind schedule right away, so we're just cutting corners to get stuff done. We're thinking somehow we can throw more people at the problem and make it better, and it just makes it worse. And the result is we end up with software that's a big hodgepodge, right? Websites that are a big hodgepodge. And then you know what we do to make it worse? We do a redesign. The worst thing you can do for your website is do a redesign. Because you know why? Embedded in that website is a number of years, I'm going to say 2 to 5 years, of decisions you made about your business. And you think that in 3 months or 6 months you can remember every one of those decisions and put it in a bunch of Photoshop comps and get it back out there and have it all be working and not work, and not break? It's like you're deluding yourselves, right? Just like we're deluding ourselves to think that we can build houses as accurately, or websites as accurately as we can build houses. It takes 9 months to 15 months to build a house. And you know why? Because I've been doing it for thousands of years. So this is what we end up with. And then we go to redesigns, and they get behind schedule, and we pick on the engineers who are picked last on the playground, and it just gets worse. And in the meantime, the number one priority is to keep the lights on and the doors open. All right. So, dubious ROI. How am I doing for time here? It's 11 o'clock. When is this supposed to end? Oh, I got 10 minutes. Okay, I'll go fast so that we can have a few questions if you want. Dubious ROI. Glamour Magazine. Once we did a promotion with Glamour Magazine, they paid us to build like this special section of our website, and we got some, I think we paid them to build the special section, and then they put advertisements in their magazine, and it was a lot of work for a bunch of engineers, and we drove like 17 orders. It was worthless. Okay, cool, fool me once. We learned. What did we learn? We learned that magazine web thing didn't work, fine. But then like a few months later, we did it again. We had this theory about like why maybe this time it would be better. And it might be better, but I can tell you from a mile away, it's not going to go from 17 orders to 17,000 orders, right? Or 170,000 orders. And that was the scale that we were talking about at our company was that kind of scale. It's like, be realistic about what's going to happen here. The ROI is very, very dubious on Glamour Project number 2. Glamour Project number 1 is an experiment, but number 2 is a giant waste of time. Which leads me to this. There's a guy who I respect a lot. His name's John Helm. He's a former professor at Columbia University. Some of you may know him because he's also been a CTO for, I think, Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch. Then he moved out to Seattle. He's worked for a number of companies out here. And he's given a talk, and I put the link to the stuff about the talk here, and I'm going fast here, so I'll cruise this. He's been collecting data for a lot of years because he's a professor, and that's what he does. And he's basically found out that basically the ROI on an IT project is worse than a junk bond. If you're a CEO or a board of directors at a company, you might be better off investing your money in the stock market, in the worst kind of corporate debt that's available. Not companies like GE, not companies like Boeing, but companies like, I don't know, what's a crappy company that's going to go out of business that's probably issuing debt? He's shown over multiple years of data, given a lot of the things we've talked about today, schedule variance and poor planning and things like that, and the failure rate of IT projects, that for the most part, we're just better off investing in junk bonds. Now, why do we do it? That could be totally demoralizing, because that's the question I would ask. Well, shoot, John, why wouldn't I just quit this and just put my money in junk bonds? Well, it's because of high risk, high reward. Every once in a while, your project is Facebook, right? Or your project is Amazon, or your project is, I'm using some great examples. But my point is they're not all junk bonds, right? Some of them are huge successes. And so that's the kind of business that at least I'm in, which is a high-risk, high-reward business. Fail fast, right? We fail most of the time. And every once in a while, we strike gold. And if you want to, he's giving a talk about that in a lot of detail. It'll be very academic if you're interested in that. The link, there's a bit.ly link down there for it. It's bit.ly/it-junk-Yale. That's on November 6th here in Seattle. Okay, so 4 takeaway actions. First is keep your perspective. What really matters? What's really the top priority in this business? Is it getting this new thing out in Q4, or is it keeping the store up in Q4 so we can take orders? Not doing any harm. Be humble. Recognize that the best people only succeed about 50% of the time. If you hit 300 in this business, you're a Hall of Famer, just like in baseball, right? You're going to be you're Barry Bonds, or actually, he's not a Hall of Famer. Who's whatever? Forget that. Schedule. Think about flow, and sometimes asking a little bit less will get your things done faster, because we're overloading our resources, and we're trying to maximize our resources, and in doing that, we're reducing our flow. And the last thing is, be realistic about the ROI, right? We're playing a high-risk, high-reward game here, and lots of times our assumptions, our belief that we actually can make this thing better if we do it the second time around isn't really true. So those are my thoughts from sitting by the river of projects for a lot of years. If people want to come up to the microphone, or I can shout the questions back, I'd be happy to take a few questions. We've got 5-10 minutes left here. And thank you very much for your time today. See Laura right down here.
So the question I've got, it has to do with the culture of leadership and helping bridge that gap. If you're working in an environment where your leadership really believes in inventing time to produce projects, and you're trying to work them into it, in my case, they're using agile methodology, and they think that they're going to get more faster with agile, so they're trying to cram more into less time with it. What would be your recommendation if I need to educate my leadership and help them with the culture of agile, so that they ask me to execute less so that I can give them?
So Laura's question here was, if you're in a culture where you have leadership that's pushing for more, trying to maximize your resource and getting lower flow, what to do about it? I don't have a great answer for that, but I'll give you the best answer I have. In my experience, it's being paid. I'll tell you what's failed, and I'll tell you what's worked. Stomping my feet and throwing a temper tantrum has failed. Right? I've tried that, didn't work. So I've just found I have to actually allocate more of my time, or you would have to allocate more of your time or whatever, to sitting down with people and trying to explain. And not everyone will believe it. There's another side of the coin, though, too, and sitting down with people is important because they have needs, too. They're on the hook for stuff, right? They got investors that they have to satisfy, or X, Y, or Z, whatever they need to do. So sitting down and talking and coming to some mutual understanding of like, okay, I'm trying to do my best for you. I'm trying on your team, right? But I can't help you if you don't help me. It's been my best success. I'll give you one very concrete example. We started using a Kanban board at Cheeseburger early on because we had when I first showed up, we had this problem. And it was very powerful because I would say to Ben, the CEO, and he would love that I'm telling the story, I'd say, that's a great idea. Let's write it on a sticky note and then come over here to you know what a Kanban board is? It's like a bunch of Post-it notes showing like where the planes are in flight. Like here's in progress, up next, in testing, things like that. I'd say, that's a great idea. Let's write it down. And I'd walk him, I wouldn't do this. I would walk him right over. I'd say, write it down. And now pick which of these projects that you're going to take off the board to put this one on instead. Right? And that was a really visceral, powerful experience for him to get that message. On his own. I saw you had a question. I wanted to say one real quick thing. I have this URL up here for anybody who has a dog and wants to try out Rover, or if you don't have a dog and want to tell your friends about Rover, that URL will send you to a coupon for your first night free, $25 off, average price about $25, so you can try out Rover one night on us. Anyway.
Hey, that's funny, by the way.
What's your name?
Luis Antezana.
Luis, nice to meet you.
Hi. It's kind of funny about the Rover thing. I'd actually tweeted that there should be like some kind of Rover takeover here because there's a lot of people that need dog sitting during this conference.
Exactly.
Yeah. My question is, I was wondering your perspective on a site that's failed very fast, hard, and publicly, the Affordable Care Act website. People having a hard time getting into that. I know you don't know much about the behind the scenes and what's involved with that necessarily, but do you have what recommendations would you make just as an outsider's view and how to deal with what's going on?
Oh, I don't even know. I read an article that said that the bidding process for that job, there's 1,800 pages of, just the bidding process is a book 1,800 pages long, and so that it's more optimized for people who know how to win bids as opposed to know how to build software. And so I think they got a real mess on their hands. They'll work it out. I mean, we got all sorts of government computer systems that work, right? People get, taxes get paid, et cetera, right? So it's going to get worked out. I mean, it's a big, hard problem, right? They've got a big thing under a lot of pressure with a lot of contractors. It's unknown. It's complicated because they're trying to use all these real-time APIs. It's the opposite of sort of doing something sort of iterative and agile. There's hope because we see a lot of state marketplaces that have made it work. Although it's funny, I went onto the Washington State one last night around 10 o'clock to see what it would cost for my family to get health care, and it was down. It said it was down for maintenance, which might be true. I mean, it was 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. That's a legit time to be down, right? So, I don't know. I don't have a great answer. They got a real mess on their hands. On the one hand, I think to myself, it'd be fun to work on that project and try and clean it up. Like, if you can clean that thing up, you're a freaking Superman, right? You can clean anything up. But on the other hand, it's probably like you'll kill yourself after 6 months of it. That's all I know. All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. I helped you out a little bit. And you can find me online at scottporad.com.